What's up, everyone? Welcome to the Hail to the District podcast. I'm Rajan, and as we enter our third month without real live actual sports taking place, I figured with all the conversations I've had with present company, my friends John and Neel, who I'm having the pleasure of being joined by on today's podcast, we have our own Slack channel, and based off that, we decided to flesh out our final thoughts on the much discussed ESPN documentary, The Last Dance, profiling the Chicago Bulls teams of the 1990s, the great Chicago Bulls teams of the 1990s, along with the highlight feature being the one and only Michael Jordan. So, fellas, as we've mentioned, there's been plenty of conversations. We've been talking about this since there's nothing else to really talk about over the last few weeks. And we have several things we wanted to hit today, but I'll start with Neel, being the resident in-house Bulls fan since the days of glory, then over to John about your proverbial 10,000-foot takeaways from the documentary itself.
Yeah, greatest sports documentary of all time for the greatest basketball player of all time.
With no bias.
So absolutely not. But I mean, the documentary reminded me, obviously, of like my childhood watching the Bulls. It reminded probably everybody about it. It was really well done. Proved a lot of things about Jordan that we kind of knew or guessed. Some interesting nuggets were in there. It was enjoyable. My wife liked it. Like it was
same.
It was amazing. It was just like a really well done 10-part documentary.
Yeah, I kind of had the same thought because it took me back. Because every time they would show like the Knicks highlights, I would just remember the times. Because every end of the school year was when NBA playoffs were, and that's when I'd go up to Pennsylvania and visit my grandparents, and automatically I'd go to the den with my grandfather, and basketball would be on. And usually it was the Bulls and the Knicks, or the Bulls and the Pacers. I distinctly remember it was always typically around the Eastern Conference Finals time. So I always remember those games. So like that nostalgia just really hit really hard on this one. Even like the rewatch, it still hit. It was like, oh my God, that was so great. Like John Paxson hitting the three that sealed it. You're like, and Steve Kerr then doing the same thing against Utah. Like I was just like, I remember that. And then of course I go, I remember that because that was the white guy that made the shot. And they were like the only white guys that were making shots.
I think it was episode 3 or 4 in that general vicinity. And I remember, like, to Neil's point, like my wife, and as a side, like the commercials came on, and like before the documentary was coming or like was about to air, my wife goes up to me. She is like, when does The Last Dance air? And I was like, it's Sunday at 9. She goes, okay, I want to watch it too. And I'm like, The Last Dance has nothing to do with dancing, right? Like, it's not a dancing documentary. This isn't So You Think You Can Dance or Dancing with the Stars. Like, it's about 1990 Chicago Bulls. She's like, yes, you jackass, I understand that, and I want to watch it. And I was like, all right. And sure as shit, she watched all 10 episodes and only fell asleep like 90% through like 2 of them, and would end up rewatching it the next night, like the portions she missed. So credit to where credit is due. Nostalgia is the right word, and that's the one thing that I think a bunch of us, being on the fringe millennial or whatever comes before millennial, Gen Y, I think it is, Gen X or Gen Y, I can't remember, that general age range. Like it was very much the fact of, remembering all of this, the where you were. I was circling back on the point of telling my wife, like when we were watching the Shrug game, I think it was game 1 of the 92 finals against the Trailblazers, and like I remember telling her, like, I remember where I was during the Shrug game when when Jordan was bombing threes early on. So yeah, speaking of Jordan, I think from the biggest perspective, and Neel alluded to this a little bit, I think this cemented a lot of his legacy. Whether that was intentional or not, there's always the story saying that like Jordan, or the rumors, the allegations, however you want to phrase it, like Jordan, aired this because he started to feel like his legacy was being threatened by LeBron, which I think is utter, complete horse caca. But I think this did a lot for his legacy. While I mentioned the LeBron comment, I have always viewed the Jordan versus LeBron argument as a convoluted stretch and an insult to the idea of professional excellence as a whole. I don't think this should be a conversation. It is an overbeaten conversation that doesn't exist. So at least from my side, I'm going to do my best to make sure this is the last time I bring it up, because this is not an argument. Jordan is the GOAT. There is no distinction, or there's no like overlap area. Like LeBron is number 2. I think we've all said this in many conversations that's been recorded and off the record, but very clearly and definitively, Jordan is one. And if you look at everything both the documentary has reminded us of, and then you go back and look at all the accolades that are there, it's absolutely staggering. So to finish out the point, I'm going to try not to mention LeBron again because I just genuinely don't give a damn about him. And I think, to Neil's point, this documentary really highlighted the difference between the two of them from a makeup perspective. But I think, John, you said it best a couple of weeks ago when I was writing something freelance, that if you want the TLDR, too long didn't read version of what's different, Jordan is the only player in NBA history to win the league scoring title, Defensive Player of the Year, and the MVP in the same year.
Same.
Doesn't that the definition of greatest of all time? Because it's not greatest offensive player. He was the greatest player, period.
There's no conversation after
on
that.
both sides.
Call me when you do that.
Don't tell me he's not an all-around player. I mean, the guy played both ends ferociously, and it was well documented throughout. It's just everybody who didn't watch or who's used to like the current NBA only hears things like Jordan would have averaged 40 plus points a game in today's league, which is probably correct, but he still would have stolen the ball a crap ton of times. He would have like locked down your best perimeter defender. He would have done all kinds of stuff that nobody remembers much of until this documentary.
Jordan's career average of 2.35 steals per game, career, not single season. His career average of 2.35 steals per game is the fourth highest in NBA history. Let's just that stat, just that stat for the whole, he's a one-dimensional scorer. Sorry, John, I cut you off.
No, I was just going to say, because from the scoring angle, though, one of the things that stuck out to me was just remembering how low scoring and how slow the pace was. And because most of these games you're watching the playoff games, and they're in the 70s or 80s, whereas now it's like if a playoff game's less than 100, it's kind of shocking. So the fact that he was still just filling it up and carrying his entire team to do so, and consistently night in and night out, you got the most out of him. Like, he just never, there was no point where you're like, oh, LeBron or Jordan quit on his team again. There was never an instance where they're like, oh, Jordan quit. Never. Not once. Did he have some bad nights? Yes.
Roy Williams with one of the best quotes. He's like, he had a switch that he could turn on and off, and he never turned it off. Right. Such a good quote. When I heard that, I was like, holy crap. That's amazing.
That one pumped me up instantly. I was like, damn right.
I know the game went into double overtime, talking about the scoring totals and things like that, but I think one of the things that really hit me, and I didn't know this, I knew of the event, but I didn't know kind of like the ramifications, like the outcome of it. Jordan's game 2 of the Eastern Conference playoffs opener against the 86 Celtics. And just as a reminder for the people born 10 minutes ago, the 86 Celtics are one of the 3 greatest teams in NBA history. They were 50-1 at the end of the season in terms of their home record. I mean, that starting 5 was just absolutely insane. I went and watched a bit of it on YouTube today. And he dropped fucking 63 on them. And I know the game went double overtime. The final score was like 120 to 122 or 122 to 120 or something like that. But then the Larry Bird quote of like, that wasn't Michael Jordan, that was God, like in Michael Jordan's
disguised as Michael Jordan.
Disguised, whatever the official quote was. That one was like, damn. And like, I mean, Bird was always very
that was after he dropped 49 on them on game 1.
In game 1, right? And he goes and drops fucking 63, and like that one was like, holy. I remember him doing that, right? But then it's like, you go drop 63 on the 86 Celtics, and it's not like they were a shitty defensive team by any stretch. I mean, again, one of the 3 greatest, if not 2 greatest teams in NBA history. Like, that one was just that was one that really stuck out to me. I was like, damn.
Bill Walton was cursing out Danny Ainge because he was switching Jordan on him, and then because Jordan was just drawing fouls on him like crazy, so he had to go to the bench. So he was getting pissed at him for it.
Dennis Johnson's frustration, and he was known as probably one of the best perimeter defenders of that time. It's just awesome.
And he was just cooking everybody, right? Like it was just watching the brilliance of his first few early years when he was just this athletic ball of unstoppableness, and then how that evolved into the ruthless assassin that he became, especially over he got through the Detroit years, which we'll cover in much more depth very shortly.
Ruthless at that time too. Like, do you remember the anecdote? He said he went golfing with Danny Ainge like after game 1, and he's like, hey, tell Danny I got some form for game 2. I mean, he just used whatever he could as motivation to kick your ass.
that I want to talk so much about the competitiveness and the tweaks and the motivation, because there's just so many little things that came out of there. But yes, when I was doing my research for like that freelance article that I referenced to the two of you, like when I was comparing LeBron and Jordan, one stat that came up that there's no play like going back to the 63 points. When Jordan would drop 50 or 60 in an era where you averaged 87 to 93 points a game, you almost shrug your shoulders like, oh, yeah, Jordan dropped 60 on them or something. It was so matter of fact in the way that he's doing it in a game where you only scored, again, 93-ish points, give or take. No player outside of only Wilt Chamberlain had more 50-point games than Jordan, and Jordan had 31. And Jordan's 30.2 points per game is still the highest. 30.12 points per game is still the highest in NBA history, right? This is, again, in an era where he didn't score quite as many points. And, despite what people, again, born 10 minutes ago will tell you, like, it was loaded with stars and much grittier, tougher defense than what we're playing in today's world.
Yeah, I mean, there were less ticky-tack fouls. There definitely were ticky-tack fouls at times. Hand checking is one of the things that gets totally brushed aside. Nobody even remembers what hand checking is, but just imagine playing the game with like this against you the whole time, and it's just like and you just dominate. So the game has totally evolved to benefit scoring now, right? I mean, the NBA had to do something when Jordan left to make it more appealing to people again, and so they sped it up. They made they just made it tailored towards offenses, and that's why it's much higher now.
And think about like Kyrie and Steph Curry, how they're so great finishers around the hoop. Can you imagine them going against the Pistons or the Knicks
and just getting kicked out of them?
Absolutely obliterated for just sniffing the hoop.
I would love to see John Starks against one of those two, just to see how he would like just rip them.
I went back and watched the 5-part Celtics-Lakers series that ESPN did as part of 30 for 30, which is another brilliant basketball documentary. Watched it about a few weeks ago out of boredom. And one of the things that I remember, it was I think it was Danny Ainge when Ainge or McHale, it's one of the two of them, when they clothesline Kurt Rambis coming down, and I think it was the 87 or 84 finals, one of those two. And like just watching them, that's fucking WWF shit right there, right? Like the way they were hitting each other. And like, you imagine that today
they go straight to blows afterwards,
right? Like it's just crazy.
And they're landing them.
They're landing closed fist blows. Yep.
And to your point, Neel, it's about like these guys. I mean, they're already getting banged up through the course of a season. I mean, Curry, for all his prodigious gifts, consistency of health, obviously, because of his size, is not one of them. And the fact that Jordan, I wanted to mention this when we were talking about the Pistons, but I'll mention it now. Like, I love the fact that when, I think after the first dismissal by the Pistons, Jordan was like, all right, my athletic gifts alone are not enough. Like, I got to get in the gym. I got to lift weights. I got to be able to take the punishment that Detroit's doling out because they're playing football with me instead of basketball. And like, just, mentally devoting himself to that, as opposed to being someone like many NBA players who are just going to be relying on their God-given physical gifts and not necessarily trying to, take themselves to that next level.
The modern game also, like the training has evolved. I mean, like there's so much now around how players take care of themselves and stuff. None of that was really around.
Night and day difference.
I mean, it's crazy. But, Jordan's getting beat up this whole time. He played 8 82-game seasons with the Bulls.
It's disgusting.
8 82 games. And 2 of the other seasons were 80 and 81.
What was David Fizdale's quote? Stick that in your analytics pipe? Or how's that for analytics?
So the only season they really missed considerable time was what, the 85
season when he missed when he had the foot.
His foot.
Yeah.
No, it was 86. He dropped the 63 after playing 18 games that year.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And was on what was it, like a 7-minute per half restriction?
14 minutes a game. And his best quote is like, okay, I'm going to make this 7 minutes the most important 7 minutes, and I'm just going to go crazy. And he just
go ape shit on them.
Build his team to the playoffs. I mean, granted, the team had 30 wins and still made the playoffs, which should tell you, something about, the competition in that time.
Yeah, the Eastern Conference wasn't too great right there. It was but to then hold your own against the Celtics after being such a shabby team, because you can see what he had around him.
It was awful.
He had a sub 500 team around him.
He had the cocaine circus.
Right.
He had a lottery team that he dragged into the playoffs and took the world champs to the limits.
That team was 30-52, if I'm not mistaken, that made it to the playoffs, right? You made it as a 30-52 team against the 86 Celtics, and the series wasn't competitive, but the games, because of Jordan's supernatural ability, the games were competitive. To the competition angle, there were just, you could spend 2 hours on this podcast just literally talking about his competitiveness and just, all the stories and the legends there. But one thing, not to A, make fun of too much of my wife, and B, not to play the chauvinist card, but my wife was kind of like, why don't they mention Jordan's wife? Why don't they mention his family life in this game? Like in the whole documentary. And I was like, look,
Jordan produced it.
Well, one, that's an obvious one, but I was going to say, like, as hokey or cliche as this might sound, like, it was very obvious that his life was just devoted to the game. Like, in fact, if you want to say, his family life would have gotten in the way more than anything else, right? Like, I remember reading something about, like, Ric Flair and Kurt Angle. I know that's WWF, but they're like, one of the reasons, among philandering and things like that, where they could never hold down a steady home life, was because the minute that they're at home, all they're thinking about is their work. Their entire life revolves mastery of their craft. And I think that's just what Jordan was. Like, I don't think it's a coincidence, even as a father, like, you don't have your kids in this documentary talking about their life with you until halfway through episode 10. Like, I think the focus of this entire thing just shows that his singular mission, soul, whatever you want to call it in life, was just basketball. It was basketball, and it was winning. It was winning basketball games. It was winning championships. Yeah. And I think that was best highlighted at the end of episode 7, where, like, the director's like, what is winning or whatever. And he's like cut, after almost breaking down and losing it there. And like, yeah, because of that was the one that kind of broke the internet when everyone was reacting to it.
That and his laugh of Gary Payton.
The glove.
Yeah. And it just, I was thinking about that comment, and I thought about it a lot, just walking, like, the way he reacted and the competitiveness and all the things we've said about this. And there's just so many little things, like at a basic level, right? Like, okay, you see how Jordan's ruthlessness and everything that we talked about is, and it's like, we've said this 1,000 times. So, like, can you imagine any universe in the multiverse where, like, he's on a banana boat with Charles Barkley and Patrick Ewing, or like he's like dapping up with like Clyde or anything like that? Like, could you ever imagine this? Like, it's not even conceivable, right?
Isn't it?
Not during the season. I could see him playing golf with somebody.
Playing golf, but there's even there's an agenda there, right?
I want to take your money, and I want to tell you that your money's in my pocket.
That was my favorite quote. I want you to know that your money's in my pocket.
But I mean, the way that he drove folks in practice, like, it's not that he would yell at folks to, like, do better. He would be doing all the things that he expected everybody else to do, and he would be putting it in like 110%.
He wasn't a tin pot tyrant that, like, do as I say, not as I do in that capacity, right? And they all knew that you either live up to his standards or you get the fuck out, right? And I think that was the case, right? Like, I want to talk about the whole Scott Burrell thing because that was hilarious at so many levels. But, like, there's a reason why he was who he was, and he would pick on Scott Burrell's of the world because, like, you're just too fucking nice, and I don't need nice. I need foxhole guys who, at the heat of the battle, or at the top of the battle, I know that I can rely on to make sure that we get to where I believe we have to go. And I think that
Scottie Burrell had a big game in the playoffs that year, though.
Yeah. A clock is right. A broken clock is right even twice a day. So,
well, I mean, it could be because Jordan was on his ass the whole season. So at some point, something's gonna hit.
But to what John was saying, like, about the whole, like, okay, could he be chummy? Like, okay, the whole '92 Dream Team, and I have
Exactly.
I could do another hour on the whole '92 Dream Team, right? But for anyone listening, I think two things that I found when I watched one previously, and I kind of listened to one at the end, were like awesome kind of supplemental chapters into the whole Last Dance. I strongly recommend anyone listen to it or read it. Number one was the the Low Post podcast that he did with Jay Adonde. I don't know if either of you listened to that one, but it was in the middle of the Last Dance. But Jay Adonde worked for the Chicago Sun, I want to say, at that time. I could be wrong. It's either that or the Tribune. But he was covering Jordan especially during '93 when he first retired, and he had a lot of tremendous insight into the background and like what the Bulls were and all of that stuff. So that's a must-listen episode. And then the NBA TV documentary on the '92 Dream Team, which was incredible. It's still one of my favorite must-watch things that when it comes on, I'll lose an hour watching it there. That was produced by the Jack McCallum book that he wrote, which is not as good as the documentary. Rare time of the documentary is better. But anyway, all that being said, Jordan said that like he didn't want to play on the '92 Dream Team. Like he was very clear about that. Like he dragged his feet on that. And one of his biggest reasons, it was not the gold medal, it was not national pride, it wasn't about playing with Magic and Larry. It was literally about taking notes on the guys who were the next wave of the game. About Karl Malone, John Stockton. I know they were veterans, but David Robinson, maybe Christian Laettner, obviously that never been.
And then he did that again with the Space Jam pickup games.
Exactly. And then he did
then
it
started
again
the
with
whole
the Space Jam
trend.
pickups.
It started the whole trend of all these guys coming to LA and playing together. And he started that just because he's like, I've been out of the game. I just got my butt kicked by Orlando, and I don't want this to happen again. I'm doing this movie, and I'm going to be in shape, and I need to know how to beat these punks.
And couldn't agree more.
I'm shocked that players actually came to play against him. I mean, maybe they were in awe, but you would think they'd be smart to like be like, dang, he's gonna like learn all my moves and kick my ass.
But that was one of the I think there was a story about one of the camps he had like in between '95 and '96, and like I'm sure as Wizards fans or Bullets fans, however you want to phrase it, like John and I, like in that particular documentary, like you noticed Juwan Howard, right? Like he was.
Yep, I saw him and I went, oh my God, what is he doing there?
Exactly, right. And you're like, you got these young guys. There were so many of them who at the time believed like, yeah, I think I can take on Jordan. Like, I think in many of those, they were like, Jordan's been 2 years, a year and 18, 20 months out of the game or whatever. Like, this is the measuring stick or was the measuring stick at the time. Let me see how I fare against that. And you saw what happened, especially in subsequent seasons after that.
Well, Brian Russell said something to him. You left the game before I could take you on, and he looked over to Malone and Stockton and was like, you better tell this kid. And what I did find it interesting, the interactions between the players, like, you know, after the one, like Karl Malone, like going on the bus to congratulate them, I was like, wow, that's a pretty stand-up dude. After
a classy guy, he's
2 years getting your butt handed to you by these guys, and then still doing it. And I mean, I thought that was pretty classy. And then I loved when Larry Bird said, "You bitch,
you bitch," right? Exactly.
You.
Right.
You can go work on your golf game now.
I was like, that is hilarious.
It's so cold, but like it's so true. I mean, that's just, you know, that's Jordan in a microcosm. I even love like the icy dapping up before the game or after the game of like Reggie Miller, but there was no like, you know, the two very clearly had, you know, animosity from the get-go, as that, you know, Reggie Miller story from the preseason game, you know, Black Jesus, and there goes that man, or the Black Cat, or whatever he called him, right? But it was
Black
like,
Cat.
Yeah, it was I just kept thinking about that, right? And like, I know LeBron will forever get credit. I know I wasn't supposed to mention his name, but like forever gets credit for the player empowerment era and all this stuff, and, you know, and what he's done for the game as it is today and the balance of power. But like the fact that Jordan, I know he had Scottie Pippen, I know, and I'll talk about Jerry Krause a little later, but like, you know, he had a lot of things kind of went his way from player personnel perspective. Like he fucking did it 6 times in a row, minus the sabbatical, in Chicago with the same team, with the city with the team that he was drafted by. And I'm sorry, but that means something substantial.
Right.
Yeah, and they were the team of the decade because of the dude, right? I mean, like, when you talk about the greatest teams in sports history, the Bulls have to be like either one or two. I don't understand like any other. There's others, but you know, like,
I'm hard pressed to find a team that's more worldwide recognizable than the 1990 Chicago Bulls. I don't think the early 90s Dallas Cowboys. I mean, maybe from a Canadian standpoint, some of the early teams and like, you know, the hockey teams are in the NHL, like the Montreal Canadiens or something like that. But I can't think of any team. Maybe now because the rest of the world watches stupid soccer, that like, you know, some of the big EuroLeague teams. But no one was. I mean, Jordan was like the four Beatles wrapped into one in terms of his worldwide popularity and like the way he was treated everywhere, right? And yeah. And this is coming from someone, I didn't root for the Bulls growing up as a kid. I think some, you know, I rooted for whatever helpless Washington team was at the time, but iteration of the Bullets at the time. But like, as you kind of get older and you start to see this level of excellence, you have nothing to do but respect it beyond measure, right?
I'm so glad I was not a Knicks fan. Like, I mean, I
always wondered about that.
My God, like this documentary, like recently I found myself pitying the Knicks, like, as of late, but watching the documentary brought back all the feelings of how much I hate them. It's just like, they are like, and like those rivalries, just, I don't see them today, man. I don't see rivalries that make your blood like boil. Like, when you see the other team, it's like, I just want to rip you. Like, I just don't see that anymore, man.
You get
the teams don't stay together long enough to you get it for like a year and then it goes away. But like the Heat and Celtics with KG,
but that was KG and Paul Pierce versus mostly LeBron. Like I think that's the last fumes we got of true hatred.
Right.
With like Paul Pierce a couple of days ago, like stating his top 5 and not putting LeBron on it, which I thought was just beautiful shade, right? And I'm like, this is what it's supposed to be, right? Like this, and then on the heels of LeBron, I just can't help but talk about this. Like LeBron's like, oh, I would have made a great teammate to Jordan. I'm like, you missed the point of all of this. When you go and say something like that, like you missed everything. Like there's the train and there's you. And you missed everything when you go and make a comment like, oh, I would have been a good teammate. No, he would have ate your heart out after ripping it out of your chest. And I just, that comment really irked me. And I'm like, just, God, you couldn't have been any more dense.
He can't win. Like when the media asks him anything, like nobody's going to let the guy win. I mean,
I think LeBron's legacy would be monumentally multiplied if he said, Jordan's the GOAT. What does he have to lose by saying that? I think, in fact, if anything else, he's going to have people who are going to promulgate him as the GOAT. But if he just simply says, hey, what can you say? Jordan's the GOAT, 6 championships. Can't do nothing about that.
Yep.
Right?
Jordan never called himself. I mean, Jordan probably knows he is. He's never called himself the GOAT. And actually, when he's been asked, he's like, that's just not even fair because I would play against them. He never said, I want to be his teammate. He never said, I would be a great teammate for them. He's like, I would have loved to play against them in those eras, but it's just, you can't compare it. And like, that's the difference right there. That is like how you get to the mentality of being the GOAT, the guy who's just going to win, the guy who just, you pick, who do you want on your basketball team if you want to win a game? Michael Jordan.
Yeah. I'm sorry, whatever Space Jam 2 is going to tell you, but it's Michael Jordan.
I would also like Scottie Pippen on my team as well. Yes. The guy was just a beast.
He was filthy.
Yeah.
Did you guys see when we're talking about slights and we're talking about the trash talk, there was a clip that made the rounds, I think I forwarded to you guys a couple of weeks ago, about Kevin Garnett and J.R. Rider in their rookie year. And like Kevin Garnett was talking trash and then like Jordan dropped 17 on them. And this was like Wizards Jordan, I think it was. And no, it would be Bulls Jordan because Kevin Garnett's rookie year was 96. But like, I always loved that. And that just kind of reminded me, like when he was talking about the little slights during the course of The Last Dance. And like that one I watched, I've watched that clip about 20 times because Garnett is very funny to begin with, and the way he describes it, he tells the story, and like, J.R. Rider's like, man, shut your ass up, don't talk to Jordan like that, right? And Jordan's like, no, he don't mean it, right? And Garnett's like, yes, I do, and then he dropped 17 on them in the fourth quarter.
Even before he went to the Wizards, assistant coaches would be going over to players like, what the hell are you doing? You do not talk to that man.
Just shut up, right? But like, I love it. Like literally during the game, in that anecdote, J.R. Rider is talking to Jordan. He's like, he don't know what he's doing, man. He's just a rookie. He's excited. Like he doesn't know it.
That's real mafia shit right there.
Right? Like, it's just incredible. And then going back to the documentary, but the LaMichael Bradford story of the Bullets, I mean, that was incredible. Like that
he just made it up.
He made it up. And dropping 36 in the first half after that, like in the first half of the second back-to-back.
5-1, right? Yeah.
It's just incredible.
So that makes me wonder if the George Karl story was fabricated.
No, Karl admitted it.
That's correct. That's true.
Okay, because I would go, okay, well, Ahmad Rashad was there too.
And Karl,
that one still seemed fishy.
Karl actually said he did it to like kind of slight Jordan. I don't know what he was thinking. I mean, Karl goes down as one of the best coaches ever, but that's not a good move. You don't do that.
Don't anger the bear.
And then Nick Anderson saying something about the 4-5 doesn't move like the 2-3 or whatever, like what, the 45 doesn't look the same as the 23. It's like, don't tug at Superman's cape, don't do it, right? Like, you, of all of these times, like, you shouldn't do this.
That game one was so hard to watch. I remember watching him come from behind. I'm like, oh my God, he's gonna steal it, he's gonna poke it away. And that game one would have just been amazing to have. Different, man.
My favorite slight of his, and I would this if I was going to complain about things, I have a few like nitpicks I had about the documentary in terms of like, oh, I feel like they should have covered this a little more, but like, you only have so much time that you could put some of the stuff in. But I felt like they should have covered a little more about him kind of getting passed up in the 1984, 85, whatever draft it is, and like the fact that Portland passed on him, which they covered to obviously take what's his name, the one-legged guy from Kentucky,
Sam Bowie.
Yeah, right, to take Sam Bowie, and because they had taken Clyde the year before, and that's why Jordan hated Clyde so much, because he felt like he should have been the pick, and the only reason he wasn't the pick was because Clyde was the pick, and was the pick the year before, which goes back to the famous story of Bob Knight telling Stu Inman, like, he's like, we have a guard, and he's like, then play Jordan at center, but draft Jordan, and he didn't, right? And like, that's why he hated Clyde so much, and like, obviously, when he had that game, he was like, he told Magic, like, I'm gonna cook this guy in the 92 finals. And
I mean, like, even the Eastern Conference Finals against Cleveland, or the first round against Cleveland that they won, he goes to the reporters, he's like, proved you wrong,
right?
I proved you wrong, and now I'm going to prove you wrong. And it's
right.
Like things that this guy like uses as fuel it's just amazing. Like,
it's
incredible. Find motivation to kick your butt, and he's never even met you in his life. He'll look at you and be like, I don't like the way your feet look, I'm going to kick your ass.
Or it's like, your toes are pointed at me, like too many of your toes are pointed at me, like I'm gonna cook you for that. There was somebody else, and I'm missing it off the top of my head, but he's like, somebody was yapping at him. It wasn't Gary Payton, but it was somebody else. But somebody else was yapping. He's like, so he's like, I have to murder this guy now. Like, he didn't say that, but it's like, I have to vanquish this guy, basically, and he did, right?
Well, he did that to B.J. Armstrong.
There was B.J. Armstrong. Yes, it was B.J. Armstrong when Armstrong was on Charlotte. Yeah.
And BJ should have known better.
Yes, right? Again, he of anyone should have known not to tug at Superman's cape. But that was just...
I mean, Horace Grant getting carried on people's shoulders. And even later, Horace Grant admits, is like, I didn't want to get up on their shoulders. They were telling me to get up on their shoulders, and they hoisted me. And it's like, yeah. He remembers I remember that.
Again, at the risk of overstating, I feel like that particular moment, as much as anything, propelled the next 3 titles. Yeah. And I know that seems like, again, a little far-fetched, a little hyperbolic, but like the fact you've got Jordan watching Horace Grant, who was, portrayed as the Stitch basically for like, the Jordan rules and all those books and stuff like that. And like him, like losing his only playoff series ever, the one in the 25-1, right? And then of course it's Horace Grant being hoisted off, and like Jordan coming back and like pathologically driven to go and and to be himself again, which led to the 95-96 season. Like, I feel like that more than anything else was just like the rocket fuel in the fire that fueled the next 3 titles.
100%.
Well, I thought it was funny that what if the MLB didn't go on strike?
Yes.
Yeah.
So that's another historical what if.
Wow. I mean, that one I kind of forgot, because it's like, I just remember him coming back, and I thought he just came back because he wasn't that good. I mean, he was fine. And I think they overhyped him a little bit, where they're like, what was it, Terry Francona?
Yeah, Tito Francona.
And Reinsdorf both said, oh yeah, he would have made it to the pros. And I was like, well, I think he might have, just on namesake, and he was athletic enough. But the fact that the MLB had the strike, and then it's like, I'm just going to go to Bulls practices now, and screw it, I'm doing this.
Like, how funny is it they had to upgrade him in their tier, whatever the tier is, like your double A or something.
They gave him to double A instead of single A.
But because the stadiums couldn't handle the crowd presence and the security detail that he needed. I mean,
in the media. Yep. So he had to face pitching that he wasn't ready for.
Yeah.
And then they all just started throwing him breaking balls, and he could not hit them.
There was a story that came out yesterday or today, I can't remember. It was on NBC Sports Bay Area, so obviously in Northern California. And as part of his like sticking his toe in the water about whether he should come back prior to in 1995, he actually went to a Golden State Warriors practice, and he like wore the Warriors uniform and everything like that in the practice, and he did so because he wanted to go against Tim Hardaway and Latrell Sprewell, and to kind of get a gauge as far as where his game was, and of course get his intel and his recon on those guys. But like that was another step, along with kind of dilly-dallying in some Bulls practices.
Armstrong,
yeah. But that was another thing I didn't know about that, but I think I read that. Like I said, I read that yesterday or today. I don't know when it officially came out. But yeah, that was. Like I said, we could spend an entire 2 hours, if not longer, just on everything that like you learned or you were relearned or confirmed about Jordan as the competitor. But I think, do you guys want to talk more about Jerry Krause, or do you want to talk more about Isiah and the whole
Jerry Krause?
Yeah, Krause is a very interesting figure in this documentary. He
couldn't defend himself. That's the sad part.
Died in 2017.
Yeah, so he couldn't defend himself. But yeah, he comes off looking awful.
Yes.
Well, Jordan hated the guy, and Jordan produced it, right? So obviously,
and Pippen hated him.
Looking terrible, but
Pippen for obvious reasons. Although some of that you have to kind of fault Pip for, but yes, for obvious reasons. So
I mean,
good.
The guy deserves so much credit for like what he pieced together. I mean, like trading Charles Oakley away for Bill Cartwright. I mean, that's a move that's really going to piss off Jordan.
Yep. And Jordan later admitted was the right move.
That's right. Yeah. Right. And then, obviously
pushing Doug Collins away.
Yep. Obviously Krause was a little bit, silly in some notions, like about Dan Marley, another one of Jordan's slights. Is like,
yes,
Krause likes this guy, I'm going to kick his ass.
I'm going to murder him.
But Tony Kukoc actually turned out to be amazing. Getting Dennis Rodman, you don't have that three-peat doesn't happen without Rodman.
No.
Right? Everybody knows this. And that's just, the guy knew how to build a team. But
my number 2 slight of what they should have covered a little more, 1987 draft, Olden Polynice for the number 5 pick to yield Scottie Pippen. They glossed over it, but the historical ramifications of that trade, I don't think could have been overstated, right?
Yeah.
Like you traded Olden Polynice, a career 8-8 guy, to move up 3 spots to get Scottie Pippen, who Krause was one of the few people who really understood the guy's potential. But you landed him for, again, a guy who averaged an 8-8 going to Seattle and never averaged an 8-8 ever again in Seattle. And like the what if scenario that I think, obviously this is about Michael and, he produced it, but like, I think that deserved a few more minutes talking about the ramifications of that and how that kind of, obviously Seattle was good after that in terms of, Kemp and Payton, but like just how another what if layer to the story. But go ahead.
Well, the thing is though that Krause, there's all these stories that came out, like how he wanted to form a team after Jordan left that had like McGrady and Grant Hill, or I think those are 2 of the names. There was the third one, but
Tim Duncan was the other big free agent in that class.
The guy never was able to put together a team after Jordan left too. So there are things there that, also point to like, hey, maybe he didn't know everything that he was doing. So it's pretty tough. I think the way that Phil Jackson was kind of pushed out and how he's grooming Tim Floyd of all, which is
so random.
Yeah, right. And so players are gonna be like, what the heck is this guy thinking now? He's probably drunk on power. And don't for an instance think that like the players behind the scenes are also talking a lot of smack about this guy, especially Pippen, right? And they're like,
behind the scenes, they were ripping
him.
They were ripping him.
But among each other, it was
sure.
Even across teams, it's like you don't want to play for the Bulls. It's a shitty organization. Like nobody wants to play for the Bulls right now. You know why? The fucking management is terrible. So that's just the way, that's just the way it is.
I think every great it is the fact that every great story needs a villain. And I think in this case, Jerry Krause was very deliberately painted as such to be the guy that like, he is the guy that broke up he's the Yoko Ono of the Beatles. He's the guy that broke up the Bulls dynasty, and the Bulls could have, a lot of people have disputed this, and a lot of people like this is physically impossible. A lot of people are like, well, they could have won 8 straight or 9 straight or 10 straight if it wasn't for Jerry Krause. And like, obviously that's so far fetched in many cases, but that notwithstanding.
Jerry Reinsdorf should take a little bit more heat for that. I mean, because they really depicted it that Krause is the reason that this team was broken up, and you cannot tell me that Reinsdorf wasn't signed off on it the entire time. He's the freaking owner.
Yes.
He can do whatever he wants, and he could have stopped that at any point in time. And for him not to do so is also idiotic. To be like, wait, Jordan's going to leave if I lose Phil? No, we're gonna keep this going. Jordan was the league MVP in the 97-98 season. Was the league MVP and just retired. Who retires the same year that you're still the best player in the league?
And should have been the MVP the year before that too.
And he should have been the MVP the year before that, and the
Right.
year Barkley won it too.
It was only because Jackie
In the
McMullen
year that
decided
Barkley won it.
Karl Malone should have won the MVP that year, and everybody followed along with her in 96, 97.
So the fact that Reinsdorf didn't take some heat for that, I thought was a little criminal.
They did touch on it. Like, they even were talking about blowing up the team going into 97, 98. And Krause.
Yeah, well, they had to trade for Pippen to Boston ready to go, which would have been idiotic.
Can't believe
The sequence, like going back to the credit part for Krause, if you look at it, it's one of those things where, like, how much of it is just this serendipitous confluence of events versus like the brilliance of Jerry Krause, right? Because if you look at the pieces that were laid to the foundation, Neel talked about a bunch of them, but he was the guy who brought in Tex Winter. He was the guy who convinced Tex that we got to run the triangle. He was the guy, as you guys said, who pushed out Doug Collins because Doug Collins wouldn't run the triangle.
because Jordan wanted the ball.
Because Jordan wanted the ball, and he was the one who brought in Phil, who elevated Phil to the head coaching job, and decided to do that. He was the guy who was responsible for the picks of B.J. Armstrong and Horace Grant. As I mentioned, I still think, and when we talk about the lopsided trades in NBA history, the Olden Polonus for Scottie Pippen doesn't get mentioned enough, but he was the one who orchestrated that. Neel talked about Oakley for Bill Cartwright. Stacey King, who was a terrible draft pick by Krause, but swapped him to Phoenix for Luke Longley, and Luke Longley being on the roster allowed Will Perdue to go to San Antonio for Dennis Rodman, right? Like, all those events, kind of putting those together, leading to the 6 championships, the 3-3. Like, it's a lot of things going the right direction. And he wasn't perfect. Like I said, Stacey King, among other dumb picks that he made, like Brad Sellers was one of them, right? But like the stink bomb ribbon on top was the whole Tim Floyd thing, which just never made sense.
He like, it's pretty interesting. Like, they even said he had this small man complex, right?
Yes.
Like, he just never.
He had a Napoleon complex.
He didn't get a lot of the credit that, honestly, he probably should have. But, that's because Jordan is the icon. The players are the ones doing, like, the heavy lifting and stuff. And I don't know. I mean, Jordan was a global icon at the time. Everybody's going to focus on that guy. Everybody's going to focus on the players. They're not going to – I don't know how many people really looked at the way GMs and things like that operate until, like, kind of the internet, came around, and everybody was, information was more accessible. Social media was around. Like, all that stuff was never really looked at back then, at least in my opinion. I don't know if you guys were really looking into that stuff like hardcore, but
I mean, all you got was what they mentioned on SportsCenter.
right.
Yeah.
And SportsCenter wasn't
newspapers.
the daily thing. It was SportsCenter was 1 hour that they repeated for 6 hours.
I'm
The
trying to
same
think of,
episode.
my expertise is more in the NFL, and I'm trying to think of, like, there was any legendary GMs that you just kind of thought about. Like, Bill Walsh was a head coach, but he was responsible for personnel. I mean, the 49ers at the time, Jimmy Johnson was the one who built the Dallas Cowboys. Like, Casserly only cared, Redskins fans only cared about him. Like, I'm trying to think about, like, was there anybody from a football perspective that you're like, I guess Ron Wolf is one of the early ones, but nobody knew. He wasn't a household name, like, or, even among the rest of the league, kind of like how Jerry Krause was in the NBA. So, no, it's a great point.
Bobby Beathard.
But Bobby Beathard, again, it's just locally. Like, you have, in the 80s, you ask any NFL fan, like, who the hell is Bobby Beathard? They wouldn't know that. Yeah, it's the whole quote that Krause had, players don't win championships, organizations win championships, and just that dichotomy there, right? And then
That
the whole
rant was way off balance.
And then that's one thing, right? And you can have that entitlement complex. I mean, at some level, you are responsible, in many cases, for putting the pieces together that turned into the franchise that it did, or to the win team that it did. But when you publicly say that, like, I don't care if Phil wins the title this year, this is his last year. Like, that's just,
or goes 82-0.
right?
Stupid. Yeah.
Like, that was just like, that was spite. And then the whole, I mean, I know this is really stupid, but the whole, like, I'm inviting every single coach and every single member of the organization to my stepdaughter's wedding except Phil.
Yeah. And Phil's like, I'm happy. I don't want to go to a wedding. It's
Right.
fine.
Yeah. Which any dude would say, like, right. You know, big ups to Phil. Cause like that's the right answer.
But Reinsdorf went to Phil at the end of the season, was like, dude, please come back. And he's like, nope.
But the blood's already in the water then, right?
Yeah. It was too late. It was way too late.
And to your point, I think there's like, I was just thinking in my head while you were saying this, and I'm like, we bitched about Ernie Grunfeld for years, but eventually the vitriol went from Ernie to Ted Leonsis, because it's like, it's your fault he's still here. Right. And I think to your point, like, this very much says the same thing about Reinsdorf. Like, why did you allow this? How did you allow the greatest team on earth ever to that point to crumble because of your ego?
I mean,
they could have. They would have need to have replaced Rodman.
Fine, Rodman, right? I mean, not to take away from Rodman. I don't know if we're going to get to it, but like, one of my other small things, like, they talk about Rodman's eccentricity and they glossed over Rodman's brilliance, but I want to make sure that Rodman's brilliance is not understated, because that dude was a basketball genius is a word we use a little too often, but he was brilliant from a basketball standpoint. Completely. I believe he was bipolar. This is my personal opinion. I'm not a medical professional, but I believe he's bipolar. He's got, something in his head that's a little different than how most people are wired, in multiple ways. But like, from a basketball standpoint, he was brilliant. And I think when funneled in the right direction, he was exceptional in that way. He just, because he was eccentric off the court. And like, he was, and he became the handful that he was, but like, how instrumental he was both the 89, 90 and early 80s, or mid 80s Pistons. And then the second iteration of the Bulls, like that's just, it's so important to them. And like, I love that little bit about when Scottie was out for the first half of the 97-98 season, and how much he stepped up and how much he became Batman alongside Jordan, at least for the first half of that year, however long Scottie was out.
Yeah, and the way he apologizes is knocking on your hotel door and asking for a cigar.
Right?
Right? Like, that's classic Rodman. I mean, like I said, I mean, the 3P doesn't happen without him. And frankly, like, it takes a great dude like Jordan. It takes a supporting guy like Pippen, and then it takes Phil Jackson to like be like, all right, we'll accept you for who you are. Just get your shit done on the court. And that's all Rodman wanted. That's all he did.
Was it right after the Vegas vacation in the middle of the season where Rodman came in to practice next morning and he was sprinting, like he was leading the laps and he was beating everybody?
Yeah, it took 4 laps to catch up to him. Yeah, they were doing that.
And it's like that dude's just cut differently in every single way, shape, and form, man. Like, just to do that, like, that's just absurd. Like, that's how you're just a physical specimen. To that end, ESPN again did another 30 for 30 on Rodman, and like
that was so good.
That was tremendous. It was tremendous, and like that delved very deeply into Rodman's upbringing, how they contributed to his personality disorders, if that's what they actually are, later on in life. And yeah, that's a must watch. Another kind of appendix to the whole Bulls documentary. Like, if anyone gets a chance, like, definitely check that one on ESPN if you have that on streaming.
Was it Kevin Garnett that told the story that when he first got in the league, and like, I think he interacted with Rodman, and Rodman was just running on a treadmill, like at full sprint after a game?
And I'm not aware of this anecdote.
I want to say it was KG was talking about, but basically he would just, after the games, he'd be full sprint because the guy was just 100 miles an hour. That's how he was
in everything.
And I think that's why he fits so well with Jordan, because they both were just all out.
And Neel made a great point that it takes a smart level of professional understanding and personnel management to understand that, yeah, Rodman's going to go to Vegas. He's going to go do whatever, hook up with whoever, and going to do all of that and, create a media stink bomb, but he's going to come in and he's going to be Rodman again. Right. And I think, he might've been a pain in the ass, but they understood how to funnel that energy, or funnel that pain in the ass, if you will.
And like, what a great teammate, right? Like, Scottie Pippen comes back after an injury and the guy has 33 tattooed in his hair and like written in his hair. It's like, I mean, the guy, like, he's a great teammate too. He wants to be accepted in the organization, and like, he would not have lasted on the Spurs. He didn't last on the Spurs, right?
He didn't. And why did he not last on the Spurs? Because he bitched at David Robinson for getting his lunch eaten by Hakeem, but David Robinson did get his lunch eaten by Hakeem.
Yep.
So it's not like he said something, to that point, like, the reputation of Rodman is the piercings and the kicking the photographer and all that, or the videographer or whatever it was, and like all the transgressions he did. But yeah, like in the locker room as part of in the foxhole, like he was a guy that they wanted to battle with, eccentricities aside. So very much so. I want to get to Isiah because that's the other main villain in this story. And that's another one, man, the whole thing between the Bulls and the Pistons. And so in any story as well as in the sports story, there's always that, like, what's that final step of overcoming the last hurdle to get to where you want to go. And everyone knows that, the Bulls losing twice to the Pistons, I think it was twice before they finally, they've finally beat the Lakers in the first NBA finals, was like, that's the thing that they wanted to get over. That's part of the Jordan Rules book by Sam Smith and all of that stuff. As I mentioned, I think one of my big takeaways was just I love how Jordan was like, fuck it, I got to get bigger, I got to get stronger, I got to be able to understand how to take the punishment that this team is doing and figure out a way to hit back and not take his talents to South Beach and pair up with two of his best friends so then he could win a title that way. And
everybody knew there was hatred. The fact that he still hates them.
Love it.
Amazing. It's just like, all right.
Undying hatred.
Feed me the spite. I'd inject it into my veins. I want all of that spite.
Yeah. And actually, I like, when you watch Isiah Thomas play, though, like if you remove your biases, the guy is amazing.
Tremendous.
So freaking good. And like, but yeah, I love that. I mean, it's a classic story, right? It's like, yeah, it's like, he who must not be named against the Celtics, right? Like,
right.
It just happens.
But there's the difference, right? Like, I mean, yeah, he finally beats the Celtics when he went to South Beach. And
right. When his workout was actually just joining two other All-Stars. So, yeah.
Somebody brought it up on Twitter about a week or two ago, and they're like, what was the most singular, most dominant, like, performance you've ever seen in like in a one game type of situation? And LeBron's game 6 of the 2012 Eastern Conference Finals, where he just trounced Boston in Boston. Like everything went in. Like he could have shot the ball with his eyes closed in the ball.
I blame Doc Rivers for that. That was terrible.
That was unbelievable, that particular game. Like that was just incredible. That was when, like, in my opinion, the narrative started to turn for LeBron in my personal perspective. But yeah, I think like that, to me, the dichotomy between there, like when you've got your tormentors are in front of you. These are the guys who are in your head, in your face. Their fist is in your face. Their fingers in your chest. Like, what are you going to do? One person left, and one person dedicated his entire well-being to defeating his bullies.
And he came really freaking close. And then this is the thing that bothered me about the documentary. I do hope we talk about Pippen a little bit. Because they called out like Pippen's migraine game, and Jordan like smirks and he laughs it off, like the game 7, and like obviously that still irks him a little bit, but like they were really close to beating them that year too, and that's the thing that I think gets overlooked. Like everybody thinks the Pistons dominated them for 2 years, but it was really like
it was game 6 or game 7 in the second in the second time, right? Yeah,
and then they swept them out after that,
right? Which led to the famous, cowardly walk off the court. And that segue, like, I know it's not cowardly. I know there's precedent for that and stuff like that. It looks really bad from the historical context.
The other precedent, though, was he was referring to when Boston did it to him.
Yep.
But the thing is that Boston.
Oh, no.
Did we lose John?
Did it as a visiting team where
Right.
they were afraid of fans coming on the court. Whereas when Detroit did it, they were the home team. So it's a totally different environment that so Isiah was throwing some bullshit there, in my opinion.
Isiah, again, bias aside, Isiah he comes off very politician-ish in any
He's
time.
just covering his ass.
Not even what he's saying, but just the way he says it. Like when he sits down, I'm not even just talking about the suits or whatever, like the way he presents himself, but just the way he presents himself, not physically from the exterior, but the way he talks and things like that. It seems very oily to me.
It's very calculated. It's very new. Like he knows exactly, but you could tell he gets so irked. Like I saw him on some show where they like started bringing up things he wasn't expecting, and then he basically just left super frustrated. He's like, "You want to know something? Look up the head-to-head record against Pistons versus Bulls with both those guys with Pistons, and you tell me who's got a better record." He was getting so distraught and so angry about it. Like I love that these two guys just still hate each other. It's just that one won't publicly admit that he really hates the other.
Right. I was surprised they didn't. Was it Jordan's rookie year where he was at the All-Star game, and Isiah and Magic tried to freeze him out from getting the ball?
Oh, his first All-Star game, he was frozen
That
out.
sounds accurate.
And I thought it was his rookie year, and they didn't even touch it in this, and I was kind of surprised because I thought that was another big reason on why Jordan hated Isiah and the Pistons, because it started out right from the beginning. He automatically felt
threatened.
Yeah.
Or just antagonized at
And I don't want to hear that. I don't want to hear that the Pistons were old. I mean, they had just won the championship the year
before.
And Isiah Thomas was still in his 20s. He's still he was 28 or 29. He only joined the league like 2 years before Jordan.
That's a lazy argument by anyone who says that. Like
he said it. That was Isiah saying that.
That was a lazy argument on his end in that case. Like you might have been old from a wear and tear perspective of 2 straight playoff runs, but like you were not old by the definition of old.
And their team was still, for the most part, intact, minus Van Horn, or what's Mahorn.
Mahorn.
Yeah, they traded for Adrian Dantley, right?
No, he was taken.
No. I'm thinking of
the expansion draft.
I'm sorry, I'm thinking of Bobby Dandridge. Yep.
He was pulled away to either Charlotte or Orlando. I can't remember.
It was Charlotte.
Yeah.
But then do you also remember another tidbit that Jordan mentioned about coming back the third year? He's like, well, Magic never did the three-peat.
Yes.
Isiah never did the three-peat. I want to get the three-peat. And I mean, it goes back to the very first thing we talked about. It's like, that's what drove this guy. Like, he's just like, here are my contemporaries. I want to kick all of your butts. I just want to.
I always thought the conspiracy theory of him being suspended was like viable until this documentary. I'm like, no, you could clearly tell that his ass was worn out.
Tired.
So the fall from grace was a big thing for him, right? Like the whole, like he was, especially at the after coming off the 92 gold medal and the dream team and like cementing himself as a true definition of a worldwide icon. And then all the stuff starts coming out about the gambling and like, his dominance in practice or his aggressive alpha male behavior and stuff like that. And that fall and like the contextual spotlight of that time and the pressure that he faced at that time, like eventually wearing on him and him kind of, succumbing to that on top of the mileage of 2 straight playoff runs or 2 deep playoff runs on one summer in Barcelona and all of those types of things. But yeah, that fall from grace is really interesting to see that he had that. And then there's
his father.
And then his father died, which just
murdered.
Enormous. And I personally, I can't speak for the two of you, but I was aware at a very million-foot level, but the relationship between the two, I didn't know it was as deep and as strong.
I didn't either. I just took it as, oh, I'm sorry to hear that.
Exactly.
It wasn't like this is catastrophic to your existence.
Yeah.
I had read a bunch of books about him, like when I was young and stuff, and like so I knew that was pretty rough for him. But like, I mean, what am I at that age? I don't even want to date myself, but I'm pretty young. I can't fathom what the guy is going through at that time. But it's like, yeah, that was pretty. You knew he was just done after that.
And I think the way he broke down sobbing after the Sonic series, where like he's in the training room, whatever, hugging the trophy. I think he was hugging the trophy, and like he's
basketball.
It was a basketball, right? So then he just lost it and like kind of let it all out, and like they kept playing that whole, or they kept repeating the whole thing. Like this is the first time he's doing this without his father. It's the first time he's doing this without his father, and like. Juxtaposed with this relationship, or like how they talked about the relationship between the two of them. Yeah, like you start to understand the gravity of it, and I think that was a big thing.
And that's the side that he wanted you to see in this, because he is the one who's producing this as well.
Yes,
So
I know.
that's the interesting thing there is like,
Well, that's how all the documentaries are done now. Lance Armstrong has a documentary on right now. You don't think he's not producing that?
Yeah, I haven't watched any of that.
Maybe Jordan was. I doubt it, because Michael Jordan is a very intelligent human being in multiple ways, shapes, and forms. But one of the things that I really kind of got out of this was that, and this is something that comes, not to relate again back to wrestling, but Jordan wasn't a hero. Jordan was an anti-hero in many cases, right? It's kind of like I almost want to say a bad guy who's a good guy, in the sense
He's like
that
the
like
Macho Man or something.
he's like Stone Cold Steve Austin, and I hate to make that comparison, right? That he's not your classic good guy in the sense that like he's the clean-cut baby-faced heel, not to, again, borrow terms from wrestling, but like he is the anti-hero. He's like, I don't care about being buddy-buddy. I don't care if my teammates love me. I frankly, as someone who don't care if fans love me, right? All I care about is this singular purpose. And that's the fabric of my being is defined by this one entire thing. Again, going back to the family concept, like him portraying, obviously he, produced this, but like, that's almost the thing that's like, I'm not saying he's a bad guy by any stretch, but I would find it very difficult to call him a good guy in the classic bad guy, good guy, dichotomy.
No, he doesn't want to be called a good guy. He just wants to be called a winner.
And that's the thing, right? He wasn't trying to make himself out. Like he didn't need to have a commercial justifying his legacy saying, I am not a role model and what should I do, right? Like this was him saying, like, I don't care where you put me on the spectrum of like, am I a superhero or am I a supervillain, in the sense that like my sole purpose was I wanted to win, and that's all I gave, ate, slept, and breathed the whole time. And I think that I was like, that's interesting that like your entire mission in life is just one thing, and where the chips fall after that, that's up to you. And that was something that I was like, it's not a retrospective of like, look how awesome I was in every way, shape, and form, right? It's like, yeah, look how awesome I was from a basketball perspective, and like, as the internet goes, fuck the kids when it comes to everything else, right?
I mean, he even like said, "Is like I should not be a role model. Like I'm not a role model." Like,
and that was accentuated by the whole Republicans buy sneakers too, and like all of those like social issues things. He's like, I'm not your hero, right? Like I'm not trying for kids to grow up to be me. I'm only trying for one thing, and that's winning that championship. That's it. And I think it was interesting for me, and not in a bad way, just in an interesting way to me. Like it's like we all, present company included, idolize him in so many different ways, but he wasn't trying to be that. Like his mission was that, and we're all idolizing that fact. That was just a big takeaway for me. I enjoyed that fact. It's like he wasn't trying to, like, this documentary wasn't meant to suck up to us from a personality standpoint or like to lay the cult of personality down. It's like all I gave a shit about every single day of my life was to win championships. And I'm like, I think there's something very respectable about that.
Absolutely. The other thing that was pretty interesting was the whole Be Like Mike thing. They dedicate an episode or like a very large segment of it to be like, you don't want to be like Mike. I mean, he lives his life was
awful existence.
Awful. Like during some of that time. And like, you only see the good parts, man. Like this guy was dealing with all kinds of stuff like behind the scenes, and you just don't want to be like that. You don't want to.
His only friends was his security detail.
That was awesome to see too.
The curly-haired guy who unfortunately passed away a little while ago was like one of the biggest stars of the show, right? I forgot the gentleman's name, so forgive me for that. But like that guy.
But then like the guy who came back after cancer and Jordan there with his family, like these are things you don't think, like, he's portrayed as this ruthless teammate and everything, and then he goes like he's with the family all the time, like helping the dude out with cancer. And this is a security guard. Like this is a guy that most other organizations would just like throw as be like, yeah, he's just like security detail, like whatever. Like he just befriended these guys. He like, played gambling games with them. Like he just found ways to connect with the people he was around through gambling and like beating them. But
there was also that scene where he was he was cooped up in his like, albeit extensive hotel suite, but he's like, this is what I do. Like, I just kind of coop myself up, smoke cigars, play some piano, and this is my existence, right? Because you can't go out and be a normal human being.
I don't know how he played the way he played, smoking that many goddamn cigars.
That's another thing, right?
Oh my God.
You want to talk about from superhuman abilities?
He smoked this cigar after games like it's nothing, and then it's just like, yeah, I'm gonna kick your ass tomorrow.
Yeah. And it's not like he's playing 24 minutes. No. He's playing 44 minutes.
82 games a season, baby.
82 games a season, both ways.
36 holes
Still
of golf
winning
on the off
MVPs.
days.
And the man doesn't sleep.
No.
That
Every
was the
single
one
thing
thing.
you've read about him, every single, irrespective of The Last Dance, every single thing you've talked about him, like the guy's a fucking vampire.
So when they said that he went to Atlantic City after the game 2 or 3 against the Knicks, I can't remember which one it was, and he said, "Oh no, we left by midnight," and like all reports were like everybody saw him there at 2:30 in the morning. I go, "Yeah, you were there till 2:30 in the morning because you don't sleep.
Yeah.
We all know this."
And the level of excellence after that never, curtailed. And yes. Two things I want to get to. I want to get to Scottie, but one other final thing, especially because it popped up in the news lately. Circling back to the Isiah Thomas thing, the whole 92 Dream Team snub. I love Jordan. It should be very clear by now. Jordan absolutely froze Isiah off the Dream
Hell
Team.
yeah.
This is not a question, right? So there was a tape that was leaked today on social media that Jack McCallum had a recording of it where basically Jordan said that, it was either the ultimatum was there, like, no, Isiah. Fine. Let's just, it is what it is. Even if you took that piece of evidence away, again, going back to the Dream Team documentary on NBA TV, the exact quote, I'm trying to find it, was basically it was Jordan says, and I quote, "That was one of the stipulations put to me prior to even me committing that Isiah wasn't part of the team," right? Now, he was trying to say somebody else made that stipulation, but I mean, what does this tell you? Like, it was very clear that he didn't want this. Rod Thorne came out and basically said that Jordan was the crown jewel of the Dream Team, and Jordan was the one domino they needed everything else to fall. So, of course, they're going to cater to whatever his demands were. They showed him showing interviews where he's like, no Isiah questions, right?
Yep, I've seen that.
All of those things, right? And so Jordan was absolutely the one that froze him out. And even if that wasn't the case, as everyone else has said, like, it's well known that everyone else hated Isiah as it was anyway.
Magic, Larry, Scottie didn't want
David
him there either.
Robinson wouldn't want him. Like, that's the thing is, like, they're focused way too much on the Jordan Isiah thing because, people miss rivalries because there's not enough hatred today in sports, and I'm dead serious about that.
There isn't. You're 100% right.
I don't know.
There's no rivalries.
Really hate each other. Like, maybe people hate KD. I'm sure a lot of people hate Kyrie.
But that's just social media shit.
Like, whatever.
There's no actual genuine player hatred anymore, right?
And so and they got to focus on two big names. So, but nobody wanted to play with that dude. I mean, they knew, and that's the way the Pistons were, like the bad boy Pistons, whatever. They had their own reputation, but I don't know, man. Like, they would have totally messed the chemistry up. Like, John Stockton and Magic Johnson are still fantastic point guards, man. All right, how are you gonna be like, all right, yeah, these guys suck too? Like, no.
And there's this counter argument that like Isiah was so much better than than Stockton and some shithead writer. Oh, Jason Whitlock, speaking of shithead writers, was like, there was a racial agenda there and stuff like that. And it's like, are we all forgetting John Stockton is the NBA career leader in assists? Like, are we forgetting the fact that he was a first team all NBA selection multiple times? Like, let's not write off John Stockton here for a second, right?
Ask a 25-year-old who John Stockton is about.
Yeah, that's different. As a 25-year-old, what happened yesterday, they couldn't tell you. I mean, that's just the world we live in right now. But that was one of the things, like that whole, I'm not blaming Jordan for this, but like it was the whole fact that it was a question that like, oh, Jordan, like, did he really freeze Isiah off? Come on. Like that was so far-fetched.
The funny thing though, is that even, what was it, Rod Thorne or somebody said even Chuck Daly didn't want him. And like, I would love to know.
I dug so much preparing for this podcast and I couldn't find anything. I dug and dug and dug and I couldn't find any story anywhere. I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm just saying I couldn't find anything.
Is he the Nets coach by then?
No, Chuck died, I think.
He coached the Nets after the Pistons.
Did he do it? Did he? I'm not denying it. I just didn't know that if that's the case. Somebody's got to look
and so that's where I kind of thought that
it's not so much the Jordan hatred of Isiah, going back to the other thing and all the players we talked about, right? Like the Jackie McMullen book, excuse me, about Magic and Bird, which is another great read for people who like to still read. But like there was the whole thing where like the one that really rubbed me the wrong way was when like, Dennis Rodman came out and said Larry Bird would be another player, would be just another guy if he was black. And then Isiah Thomas doubled down on it. And it's like, okay, I get that you're sticking up for your teammate, but like, it's just a dick comment to make in general. And then him calling Magic bisexual because of on top of the HIV thing coming out. And it's like, and you suddenly think people are going to invite you to play on the greatest team in the world after you make public comments like this. Like you can't be that stupid. So
yeah, it's just easier to blame Michael because he can absorb it. His legacy can absorb the whole thing, and it's 2 gold medals, 6 championships versus Isiah's 0 gold medals, 2 rings. It's just one of those like, yeah, whatever. See ya.
Did you guys find it interesting that so like Horace Grant was pretty pissed off about all this?
Well,
I believe Horace Grant wasn't the snitch. Maybe that was just me.
Right. Oh, I think there are multiple sources. So to single him out, I thought was wrong. But I thought overall, Horace Grant was portrayed pretty well.
I thought so too. And I'm going to use that.
That was why I was a little surprised that he was so upset about this.
I'm going to use that as the segue to my last point that I'm going to cover with Scottie. Yeah. Right. And like, there's been some murmurs. I haven't read the clickbait or anything like that about Scottie being portrayed in the way being angry in the way he was portrayed. I
thought he came off great.
If I had to complain about anything, it's that we didn't fully give Scottie his due in terms of how great he was, because let's be clear, Scottie was incredible and very worthy of being named one of the 50 greatest players of all time when that list came out. But if I had a complaint, but to see him viewed negatively, nothing, even putting bias aside, like someone like my wife who wasn't biased didn't come away being like, oh, Scottie was kind of a shithead, right? Like nothing would insinuate as such.
The only thing he did was the 1.8 seconds left in '94 where he didn't come on the court. And Tony
the Eastern Conference Finals against the Knicks and the migraine game. Those are the 2 blemishes.
Why was that brought up when Jordan wasn't even there? And that's where I think people forget, like, it's a documentary about the Bulls.
Right.
And so
it was a pivotal moment.
It's a pretty big moment to show Kukoc was actually a very important part of the team. And obviously, like, Pippen had his issues. But, anybody who's ever watched it, even before this, they heard Jordan's Hall of Fame speech. He's like, you got to mention Scottie Pippen anytime you talk about me.
So many times.
So episode number 1 or 2, he's just like, Scottie Pippen is the greatest teammate I've ever had. You cannot mention Jordan without Scottie Pippen. All right. And then even though they focused on the migraine game, if you look at the last game when they were sweeping Pistons, he's like, yeah, when I saw Scottie just get up as if nothing happened, that's when I knew that they were done. That's when I knew that we just had them.
Yeah.
So he's praising this guy. He's like, I don't
know when it's contrived. I haven't dug into it, and I frankly don't care to, and I won't. But like, where this entire thing is coming from, like, oh, Scottie was livid. Like, I personally don't believe that there was anything to be livid about.
The game 6 against Utah, where he had the back problems, and the guy toughed it out like a champ. I thought that was another instance where they could have kind of thrown him under the bus, but they certainly didn't.
No, he admits it. He was like, I was put out there as a decoy, but like they showed a lot of highlights of Pippen.
He was still hitting shots.
And on top of that, one of the other underrated storylines, like everyone loves, understandably so, the fact that like Jordan and Scottie like clamping down on Tony Kukoc in the first game against Yugoslavia in the 92 Olympics.
Right.
One of the things that kind of goes, I guess, swept under the rug is that Kukoc said Pippen was an amazing teammate to me after that. Right? Like he was such a great teammate, like and did so much for his career, his being Kukoc's career after that. Like, yeah, it started off rocky, but that's their animosity towards Krause, not their animosity towards Tony Kukoc per se. Right. And like, I don't know. I because it was a Jordan Pruitt documentary, because you only had so much time to air what you wanted to air. Yes, they probably glossed over Scottie in some cases where they could have really talked about just how incredible, especially from a defensive standpoint, that he was. He is arguably one of the greatest, if not the greatest, wing defender of all time. and maybe that didn't get its due. But for him to come off in a negative light, I mean, Rodman, as much as they talked about his partying, I don't think Rodman came off in a negative light. Everyone's like, that's Rodman, right? Maybe Horace Grant just from the snitching perspective, but like if anyone, it's just Zeke and Krause who really came off as the real dicks in this series. So,
yeah, I mean the Pippen thing. Shit, what was it? Like, I mean, when they talked about his family and stuff, dude, I honestly, like, I had never read up on his, his family situation. Like, two bedridden people to take care of, and I think, like, he came off negative at the end because they focused so much on him berating Jerry Krause, and because like the whole, I want to be traded. Like, they did spend a lot of time focusing on how Pippen sat out. Like, Jordan even said he was in the wrong. He was a little selfish or whatever. And so maybe that's just Jordan speaking his mind. And I think people tend to focus on, like, the controversial things that'll get clicks nowadays versus, what's happening, all the positives and stuff, because that's just the way it works. But
just the way it works.
I mean, man, I was talking to my buddy Sanjay about this before. And like, we're both like, yo, Scottie's amazing. Like, he didn't come off bad at all. Like,
No.
it was,
Yeah, I didn't think so. I mean, he definitely had some lowlights in the thing, but I thought overall, he came out really
you would be
positive.
angry too if you're like a top 5 player in the league and you're the 122nd.
Right. Yeah, and so like I think anybody can relate with him on that, where he's like, no, because at that time he didn't have any room to negotiate. Reinsdorf really screwed him though, because even Reinsdorf told him, you don't want to sign this deal, you don't want to lock yourself up. But then to not be like, dude, we're gonna give you an extension, we're gonna bump this up, and we're gonna make this right.
That's the double-edged sword, right? Like Neel talked about the family obligations and like, the disabled, family members that he had and stuff like that. So he needed to take the check, right? And that's the kind of, I hate using these terms because the cultural significance they have, but like the slave owner slave mentality, where like, I'm the plantation owner, I can, sign you and give you some money just to sustain yourself and feel like you're rich, and then kind of keep you there because that's what I can do. And like Scottie being, poor and growing up and needing that money to kind of take care of the people he did, they locked him up at the lure of the first money he could get, not knowing that money is going to, or, knowing that 8 years down the road, that money is going to be a joke, the 122nd ranked salary or whatever it was. But yes, to John's point, like the fact that you didn't even revisit the idea, and it took this much animosity, and even then he never really got his contract extension.
He just got money from Portland the next year.
Right.
Yeah, it was a sign-in trade. But yeah, I from an organizational perspective, how can you say you run a quality organization when you won't even take care of your freaking all-stars?
Well, when you win 6 championships in 8 years. Right.
I mean, they ran Horace Grant out of town. They could have very easily kept him around and wouldn't have had any need to sign Rodman.
For whatever you want to say, Pippen had miles in the odometer. People forget that in that Western Conference Finals, the first Western Conference Finals against the Lakers, the Trailblazers had the Lakers on the ropes for the first 6 to 8 minutes of Game 7, and Pippen was on the court for those Trailblazers. That was Mike Dunleavy's Trailblazers. So before Kobe and Shaq had the whole big comeback thing, but this is not about them. Any final thoughts?
Jordan's still the GOAT.
Jordan is still the GOAT. I didn't have any questions going in, and I have even less questions if that's possible coming out. Also, I forgot, or just briefly touched on it, but man, those Orlando Magic teams were so good back in the mid-90s.
Oh my,
they were.
You saw the 30 for 30 on them?
That was one of my favorites. ESPN's done some brilliant documentaries, and that 30 for 30 is one of them. I will die on the hill that people don't understand how incredible Penny Hardaway and Shaq really, really well.
That's fake though. Like, so at the end of that, they had Shaq and Penny talking as if they were buddies and stuff, and like,
Oh,
you know,
so
That's because they were producers.
So contrived.
That was like one of the first documercials.
Although
as Simmons
Shaq
calls it.
has kind of quelled a lot of his younger beefs, like obviously the thing with Kobe, a little bit with Penny, like he has, maybe because he's just older in the media now, but I think, you know, he's not so much about, you know, tell me how my ass
They're
tastes.
controlling the narrative.
Yeah.
That's what they're doing. They're getting involved with these documentaries and they're controlling the narrative. So that's what they did in that one.
It was definitely forced in the Orlando one, but just this, I think
that was so like terrible.
Yeah. But how incredible young Shaq was and how incredible Penny Hardaway was. And especially when you look at people like Orlando being so pissed off when they passed on Chris Webber for Penny Hardaway. And it's like, I don't know if you should be pissed about that anymore.
And then when you look at how Jordan swept them after hoisting Horace.
Exactly. And then you add in that last little bit. It's like that team was incredible and then Jordan swept them. Right.
Well, and Nick Anderson forgot how to shoot free.
Although no, but Shaq was in LA that year. In their defense, Shaq wasn't in the 72 and 10 year. Shaq was in LA. I do remember that distinctly.
No, Shaq was on that team.
Was he? Am I missing? I have to go back and look at it. But yes,
Shaq left after that. Shaq left after that. No, that's what made that special. There's no way Orlando makes the Eastern Conference Finals without Shaq that year.
Is that the Eastern Conference Finals? Am I?
Yes.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
No.
No, Shaq was there.
Okay. So maybe it's the season
for the '96 Bulls season. Yeah.
96, 97. The 72 team, the 72 win team, the greatest team of all time.
Yes. And if we want to end there, I think that's the perfect thing. That I still think, I would argue. I was telling my wife this while we were watching it. I'm like, the 1995-1996 Chicago Bulls are not only the greatest team in NBA history, but I would say one of the greatest additions of any team in any American professional sport ever. I can't really speak to hockey that well, but I mean, you're talking about the 27 Yankees, 72 Dolphins, you know, those types of teams. The Bulls are on that Mount Rushmore.
What I thought it was interesting that like Wilbon said that the '92 Bulls were better.
I do remember that comment. Now that we're
And I thought that was an interesting one because it's like, well, that was a different one because one, it was a younger Jordan, and you had Horace Grant as opposed to Rodman.
You
got a couple other
Paxson. Yeah.
Also, and I got to wrap up on this, but also the '96. People forget how good that Seattle Supersonics team was too, and that entire team got fucked because of Jim McElvain. So former Washington Bullets member Jim McElvain.
They gave him a big fat contract.
Because they gave him a big fat contract and they gave the money to McElvain instead of Sean Kemp. And Sean Kemp got angry. Sean Kemp started pouting. Sean Kemp went to Cleveland and Sean Kemp got really fat. And that just
Sean Kemp, man.
Yeah. But Sean Kemp was thunderous. And that was such a good series. That was another, I remember distinctly where I was when that series was going on. So, all right, guys, thank you so much for your time this evening, and for everyone who's made it this far. Thank you so much for listening. Subscribe to us on the usual channels. Once again, thank you both for staying up this late, and we'll be publishing this on Friday.